Hello there. My name is Nancy Shore, and I'm the Strategic Partnership and Volunteer Coordinator for Ann Arbor Public Schools. I want to welcome you to volunteering at Ann Arbor Public Schools. It's wonderful that you've decided to join us, and I hope that this video is going to allow you to learn some different hints and tips, as well as some practical information about volunteering at Ann Arbor Public Schools. So let's get started. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about about APS itself, so you can learn a little bit more about who we are and what we're about. I'm going to talk a little bit about your role as a volunteer, how to recognize and report abuse, how to have great success with your Ann Arbor Public Schools contact, the best ways to prepare for your placement, and then finally, some student behavior strategies and next steps. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about Ann Arbor Public Schools and who we are and where we are at. So you saw me, I'm Nancy Shore, and I am the Strategic Partnership and Volunteer Coordinator, and I'm here as your onboarding consultant and support person. So you are going to be placed in a school, and at that point, when you're in that school, that's going to be your primary contact person that you're going to rely on for your supervision and for your support. But I am here as you need to access information. If you have general questions, always feel free to reach out to the partnerships office. And then we're also going to have a community engagement assistant who's typically a University of Michigan student who is also helping us as we are getting you onboarded and during your volunteer experience. So a little information about Ann Arbor Public Schools. So this is our enrollment data from fall 2021. And as you look at this information, what are some things that maybe jump out at you? What surprises you? And what do these stats say about Ann Arbor Public Schools? So as you look at this information, it may surprise you that we have as many students as we have that are impacted by poverty. Ann Arbor itself is perceived as a relatively affluent community, so it's surprising that we have 1 in 5 students that are experiencing poverty. And so something to know about our schools is that we have a lot of economic diversity. So in a particular classroom, you may have a student whose parent is a professor at U of M, and in that same classroom, you may have a student whose parent is doing custodial work at the University of Michigan. And so that's the kind of diversity you're going to see. And so that means that we have students that are coming into our schools with different challenges, different strengths, different things that they're addressing and dealing with. And so that's something to keep in mind. Also, that our schools are really different depending on where they're located. There are some schools that are higher poverty. They have more students that qualify for free and reduced lunch. That tends to be students that are in schools that are more on the east side of our county, closer to Ypsilanti. And then we also have some schools close to downtown or on the west side that have more students that are affluent. And so that's something to think about. We also have some schools with certain populations of students who speak English as a second language. And so depending on your school, you're gonna encounter lots of different students. Something else to also recognize is depending on your classroom, it's very possible because most classrooms have at least 20 to 25 students, you're going to encounter a student that has one or many of these different identities. And so you want to keep that in mind, not making assumptions about students and really being ready to help them learn. So if you want to learn more about Ann Arbor Public Schools, you can go on our website. This is a great place to look for information about your school. We're also on social media, so you can find us there. And then we have a news site, news.a2schools.org, with lots of great articles and videos so you can learn more about AAPS. Something that you definitely want to know as a volunteer is when are schools not going to be in session. So definitely go to our a2schools.org/calendar website page, and you can find there a calendar for the year. It'll show when breaks are, early releases, testing day. So that's really important for you to know. And then anytime there's a snow day or closure, we'll post that information in lots of different channels. And you're also probably can find out about it at Better Impact and in certain email and text notifications. In terms of our protocols for COVID this year, know that right now those protocols are still in development, and depending on what happens with COVID and how we're learning about what we need to do, there may be some protocols in place once you start your volunteering. And so for up-to-date information about what's going on in terms of our COVID protocols, please check Better Impact. or a2schools.org/volunteer. It's very likely that we will follow guidance that is provided by the CDC. We will probably follow guidance that is provided by our public health department and also be in alignment as possible with what the University of Michigan is doing. So key takeaways for you learning about AAPS. We talked about the economic diversity and the diversity in general. We have a growing ELL population. You've got lots of places to find out if schools are closed. That calendar page is a great place to start. And then COVID protocols, if we have any, we'll give you updated information right before you start volunteering. So now I want to talk a little bit about your role as a volunteer at Ann Arbor Public Schools. And so the wonderful thing about any volunteer who is working in our schools is that lots of studies have shown that just having one positive adult role model in the life of a child can be tremendously important and impactful on that student. So then what does it mean to be a positive adult role model? What comes to your mind? You may think about somebody who is trustworthy, who listens, who is interested. Any of those are absolutely the kind of traits that we want you to bring when you work to our students. So really think about being that positive adult role model. And if you want to think about what your number one goal is as a volunteer with our schools, it's to get to know the students that you're working with. You absolutely want to build that relationship and connect at the first time that you're getting to know them. And so how can you learn about those volunteers? You can get to know them by their interests, their needs, their culture, their strengths, even what their name is. So these are all great ways to learn about them. And an interesting thing to keep in mind is that you're coming into the schools with your own identity, with your own interests, needs, culture, strengths, and name. And so thinking about your identity and things that you assume are quote unquote normal that may not be true for some of the students that you're serving. So if you're a different racial or ethnic identity than the students that we're serving, if you're a different age, then there may be things that you think are the right way to do things, or the way that you think that they should be done, or that you think that they have been done, that may be different. And so that's why we really ask you to get to know our students so that you can meet them where they're at. So what are some ways that you can get to know our students? Well, you can think about any time that you've gotten to know people in different contexts. You can ask questions, you can play games, you can look for visual cues. What are our students wearing? What are they interested in? You can ask the teacher or your contact. All of those are great ways to get to know our students. So another part of being that positive adult role model is specifically being a model. And so we really want you to be a model for our students. No, I don't mean putting on some fancy clothes and striking a pose. When I say model, I'm really talking about modeling for students what it looks like to be a successful adult and what it looks like to be a successful student. So how can you show good organizational skills, good time management skills? How do you get tasks done? How do you focus on what's important? What are some strategies that you've learned, and how can you share those with students in ways that allow them to see, oh, that's an interesting way to do it. Maybe I can think about how that would work for me. And also looking at what is the teacher showing in the classroom, and how can you help model what the teacher is showing to those students. So that's a great role that you can play in our schools. At the same time as you're being that positive adult role model, on the flip side, you are not a student's friend. You're not their Facebook friend, you're not their best friend. And the reason for that is that when you think of yourself as a friend, that blurs the line between that positive adult role model and something more. Friends share personal information. They invite each other over for parties. They hang out. And you're just not going to be doing that as a positive adult role model, as a volunteer in our schools. So absolutely, you're not thinking about yourself as a friend, but more as a coach or a camp counselor. So something else to keep in mind in terms of your boundaries with students is that all of our students are covered by a federal law known as FERPA that protects their student information. And that means that students cannot consent to you sharing information about them with other people outside of the school setting. So what does this mean? This means that you're going to hear all kinds of things about your students. If you connect with them, they're going to share everything with you. What's going on in their lives, what issues they have, what gossip they've heard. And that's fine. You can hear all that and use that to help better work with your student. But at the same time, you're keeping that information private You're not sharing it with your roommate or your coworker or the person on the street. There may be times where it's okay to share it with your professor. Let's say, again, if it's for supporting the education of that student, then sharing it with your professor in a school setting, that could be okay. But we're not sharing it with anybody who doesn't need to know the information because the student cannot consent to doing that. Another important factor that you need to know is that you should never be alone with the student. And by alone, we mean in a room by yourself, just with that student where no one else is around, or taking that student to the bathroom where there's nobody else there. And the reason for this is if you're somewhere where nobody can see you and something happens and it's only you and that student that are witnesses, that could have really negative implications. So always make sure that you're within the eyes and supervision of an AAPS staff member. So this can either be, and this doesn't mean you can't do one-on-one. You can absolutely do one-on-one work. You just want to do it in the classroom. You can do it in the hallway, any public space, in the library, as long as there are people around, so that you always know that it's going to be a place where you're going to have somebody supervising you. So what are some key takeaways about your role? You want to first and foremost build that relationship, connect with that student, be that great positive role model. You want to respect that student's privacy, not sharing information about them outside of the school. And of course, we want you to never put yourself in a situation where you're alone and something could happen. So always make sure that you're in some public setting or being supervised when working with AAPS students. So now I want to talk a little bit about a topic that I hope you never have to encounter at our schools, but you may. So we really want to make sure you have this information, which is child abuse. So first of all, what is the general law definition of child abuse? And it is harm or threatened harm to a child's health or welfare that occurs in an intentional way. So it's not accidental, it's to a minor, and it's by a child's parent, legal guardian, or somebody who is responsible for the child's health or welfare. So that's what it means to have child abuse happen. And there's different indications that you may see that makes you suspect that is happening, that definition is happening. So you may see physical harm being done. You may see mental issues, students acting in a way that makes you concerned about they're being mentally abused, anything sexual that they've told you, any of that you may encounter. Absolutely, that's something that you want to be observing, and then we'll talk about what you can do about it. On the flip side, there are things that you may encounter that are not considered abuse. So any of the things listed on this slide, not abuse. Head lice, educational issues, issues attributed to poverty, siblings hurting each other, those don't fall under that definition, but are still absolutely things that you as a volunteer can share with your contact if you're concerned about that child and want to make sure that that child is doing okay. So if you see any of those signs of child abuse and it is somebody who is responsible for that child, the child is a minor, it's intentional, then you immediately tell your contact at our school. So an AAPS staff member. You can also tell your professor or staff at your program or course or school. But absolutely, you need to share that information. You are required to report it to the contact. And the reason that we rather you report it to the contact versus report it directly to the child services is because you don't necessarily always know what's going on in that child's life. And we wouldn't want you to get involved in something, A, that may be not what you think, or B, maybe a long process that you have to spend a lot of time in without really knowing that. So absolutely, you need to make sure that the student knows, I have to tell somebody what you said to me. And if you feel like it's not working out, nobody's doing anything, you're really still concerned, you can always go on to the MDHHS, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services website, and you can actually report the incident yourself, and it will be done anonymously. Always make sure that you are keeping anything that you hear confidential. Any of the reports that you hear will also be confidential. So what are the key takeaways? Knowing the signs. So really looking at that child, getting to know that student so you can see if there's an issue. Report it. If you hear something, tell your contact and keep it confidential. So don't share it with other people. So now I want to help you be set up for success with your AAPS contact, because in addition to getting placed with the student or working with students in a classroom, you're going to have a relationship with one or more AAPS staff members. And so, how can you make sure that that's a successful relationship where you're both going to prosper and you guys are going to do great together? So, I like to think about it like you guys are on a crew team and you are one of the people that are rowing the boat, and your AAPS contact is that coxswain, is that person who sits at the foot of the boat, the head of the boat, and gives the orders, gives encouragement, make sure that everybody knows what their role is and how they can work together to win that tournament. And you, as part of the crew, on the team, you also need to be strong. You need to be ready. You need to be focused. And so that's your role. And then your AAPS contact is the one that's going to give you the direction, going to give you the guidance. And you guys, if you work together, you're going to be super successful in supporting that student. So then what can you make sure that you do to really not screw it up? And here's what I'll tell you that almost every contact tells me about what is really challenging about volunteers. And that is that they don't communicate. So you have made a commitment as a volunteer to be in a classroom for at least 3 months, for at least an hour a week. And that amount of time is a commitment, is a promise. And so you need to fulfill that promise by communicating if there's a reason that you can't fulfill that. The students are counting on you. So make sure that you always we want you to be a communications Jedi. Communicate early, often, multiple channels. I'm not going to be able to be there today. Sorry, I'm sick. And also think about your level of commitment. And if you're not able to commit to being in that classroom for the amount of time you should be, maybe you need to think about a different placement or doing something else. But otherwise, we really want you to show that commitment. So we have this volunteer educator agreement that is a tool that we're providing you as an AAPS volunteer, and that is something that is a Google document, Google form that you can actually use to set the stage for all these different things that we talked about. So you can talk about your role, you can talk about when your first day is, when your last day is, what your schedule is going to be. So that's a really great way to initiate your placement so that both of you are on the same page. So we really encourage you to use that. So how do you set up yourself for success? Join the team. So you're on the crew, you're following the lead of the coxswain of your AAPS contact. You're going to be strong, you're going to be ready. So that's how we want you to think about your role. We want you to communicate if there's a reason that you're not going to be able to be at your placement. And we really recommend that you use this agreement to help solidify the relationship between you and your contact. So now, what are some things you can do to make sure that you are ready on that first day when you come to your placement? So there's lots that you can do, whether you're a student now or you're a lifelong learner. We've got a great volunteer guide. You can go on a2schools.org. Your contact may give you some resources. Get as much information as you can to feel ready. We've got this Better Impact system, which we'll talk about more in a second, to help you get ready for your placement as well. We've got that agreement that I talked about, and of course, understanding your responsibility when it comes to communicating about your schedule, initiating, meeting with that contact, completing the agreement. Put that on yourself because that's your role. So I just talked about Better Impact. So Better Impact is the system that you set your account in. It's where you're going to go to have your placement information. Either you'll choose your placement or somebody will provide your placement for you. You can get news and resources there, and there is an opportunity to log hours. And so if that's something that you will need to do, you will be told that by your coordinator. So on your first day, definitely make sure to know where you need to go in the school, where you need to park, where you should be arriving in terms of inside of the school, so that when you get there, you are ready to go, how you need to get there transportation wise. Show up early, definitely give yourself some time because it may take a little while to get yourself to your classroom. Go to your main entrance. All of our doors are locked, so ring that buzzer and always bring your photo ID because you're going to go into the main office. You're going to get a visitor badge. They're going to scan your ID. And so you should be good to go. And you're going to do that every single time that you volunteer. So some key takeaways. We've got some great tools for you. We talked about that agreement, and you can do everything you need to do to think about how can I be ready for that first day. So finally, I want to share with you some hints and tips around how to deal with student behavior. I'm sure many of you have worked with students before, and so this just kind of gives you a nice little overview of that. So the first thing to think about is that all of the students that come into our schools have needs. And there are about 6 basic needs that anybody has that, if fulfilled, then they can feel like successful humans. To be understood, feel safe, be happy, have your sensory needs met, be successful, and belong. And so, what do you think happens when we don't get these needs met? What happens if I speak a different language as a first language other than English, and I'm trying to communicate in the classroom and I'm not understood? How might I act? What might my behavior look like? What might it look like if I haven't eaten all morning and I'm hungry and now I'm being asked to do something in the classroom? How might I behave? What about if I am the only person of a certain identity in that classroom? What if I'm the only Black student or I'm the only transgendered student? How might that impact my behavior? And so, a lot of what you want to think about is when you see students behaving in certain ways, it's probably not because they're bad kids. It's probably not because they like to misbehave. It's likely because they don't have one of these needs fulfilled. And so you can really think about, as that volunteer, how can I help that student get that need met so that they can be successful? How can I help them feel safe? How can I help them feel successful? That's absolutely something you can do as a volunteer. And so you're also, as a volunteer, in addition to looking at the needs, you're going to encounter students that are going to show you some big emotions. So what can you do in the moment when a student is angry, crying, throwing a temper tantrum? First and foremost, being calm is a great positive adult role model move. So you can stay calm. That will help the student as you let that student calm down. Don't try to solve the problem right away. Give them time to calm down. And absolutely, we do not want to call a student out in public around all of their peers. So screaming at the top of your lungs, the frustration that you're having with this student is only going to make them feel worse. And because we don't know what's going on in this student's life, we don't want to add on to their feelings by also feeling like they're being shamed. And then this is a great opportunity for you to always validate emotions. We never want to make somebody feel like they're not allowed to have an emotion. Students are absolutely allowed to feel angry. They're allowed to be sad. They're allowed to be frustrated. It's just, how are they showing that is the challenge. And so we want to work with them on their emotion. It's okay to have that emotion. And then this is also a great thing that you and your AAPS contact can discuss, which is, what are some goals that you can set to help that student better manage their emotions to become a successful adult. So the final piece of information that I want to share with you is a little bit about the way that you can talk to our students that will really help them be successful as you praise them, as you ask them to complete their work, as you guide them in the instructions that they're given. So first is this reinforcing language. So how can you reinforce something positive you see in that child that you want them to recognize and do again? You want to be as concrete and specific as possible. Don't make it about you. You don't want to hold up one student as a shining example for everybody else. Like, why can't you do it like Nancy does it? Because we don't know what's going on in a student's life, and we don't want to create those sorts of dynamics in the classroom. And then how can we find a strength in any student? And this is not about sugarcoating. This is not about lying to a student, but every student has some way that they have made some progress. And how can you note that? Here's some sentences that you could use. What helped you do that? How does that feel? What made you decide to do that? So these are great because they're about being that coach, being that positive person in that child's life. Next is this reminding language. And so this is language that allows us to remember that every kid probably knows what they need to be doing. If they've been given a instruction and they're not doing it, we don't want to by default just tell them the instruction again. So let's be neutral in our body language and tone, be as brief as we can, and say, what do we need to be doing right now? Show me how it looks when we're sitting on the carpet. What will it look like when we're ready to go to recess? So really making it clear about what they need to do, and they can remind you of it rather than you just telling them again. And then finally is that redirecting language. So this is when the kids are off the rails, not listening, haven't been able to remind them. then this is the time when you need to be very specific, very direct. It's time to sit down, put your book away, and take out your pencil. If you can't put your shoes on, you can't go outside. And so that makes them understand, put your shoes on so we can go outside. Makes them understand how you need to be moving in this world. And it is not about judgment, it is not about anger, it's just about direct language. So what are some key behaviors? Always be thinking about, what need does this child have that I could help fulfill to allow them to be successful? And why is that need? How could that contribute to how they're behaving right now? Remaining as calm as possible so that we can be that good positive adult role model in the moment of frustration or big emotions. And then thinking about the words that you can use to really support that student. So now I'm going to send you off with your next steps. And first of all, in your Better Impact system, you've got 2 badges that are going to show you that you've completed the onboarding process. You'll see a background cleared and an orientation complete after you do the orientation. Those 2 badges mean that you have successfully done everything you need to do on our end to complete your orientation. And so then you'll be able to move on to getting placed at a school. What is that timeline? So you're going to complete your application and onboarding. We're going to work on getting you placed. So you'll either be able to go into Better Impact and automatically select your option for what you want to do to volunteer, or we may be given a schedule that then will add to Better Impact so you can have that information. Either way, you will then be introduced to a AAPS contact who's then going to be your role. We're going to hand you off, and then that person is the one that's going to supervise you, is going to give you your goals. You're going to be talking with them. And so you want to reach out to them, you want to get those details, you want to clarify your schedule. And if it doesn't work out, you can always go back and get placed somewhere else. But we want to make sure you get to the point where you're working out your details, you're working on that agreement. And our goal is, once the beginning of the school year starts, we're hoping that after you complete your onboarding, you can get a placement within 2 weeks. So that would be for the fall semester around mid-September into October. And then for the winter semester, or starting again in January, we'll do placements from January into early February. So for you guys, you got to complete your next steps, get your onboarding done, which is the getting your background check cleared, getting your orientation completed, meaning the quiz, and get that volunteer guide read. Again, a great resource. It's got lots of good information. And get your placement. Use that agreement if it's going to be helpful for you as a good grounding point between you and your AAPS contact. So now it's time for you to get this video completed, take your quiz, and see how you do. You need to get at least 50% correct. So thank you so much. We are always here for you as part of your AAPS family and as part of your journey as an AAPS volunteer. So feel free to contact us if you have any additional questions, and I look forward to seeing you in our schools. Thank you so much.